Good morning everyone. Today I will show you use of marginal costing and contribution per unit for short-term decision making. In the short term, selling price and variable cost are assumed to be constant at different levels of activity. We are given 4 different levels of activities: 100,000 unit, 150,000 unit, 200,000 unit and 250,000 unit. Selling price is 20 pound per unit, variable cost is 15 pound per unit. Selling price and variable price per unit is same at different level of activity. Contribution per unit is selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. When you deduct 15 pound variable cost from selling price of 20 pound per unit, you get contribution of 5 pound per unit. Because selling price and variable cost per unit are constant, that is why contribution per unit will be constant as well. Second thing that we need to understand is total contribution increases with increases in output and sales. Total contribution is sales revenue minus total variable cost. At 100,000 level of activity, if you multiply 20 pound price per unit by 100,000 unit, you get 2 million of sales revenue. When you multiply 100,000 unit by 15 pound per unit of variable cost, you get 1.5 million variable cost. We deduct total variable cost from sales revenue, we get a total contribution of 50,000 units. Now our next level of activity is 150,000 unit. Difference between 150,000 unit and 100,000 unit is 50,000 unit. We know contribution per unit is 5 pound per unit. When you multiply 5 pound per unit by 50,000 unit, our additional contribution is 250,000 unit. As you can see, the total contribution between 150,000 unit and 100,000 unit is 250,000 unit. It is because of additional unit of 50,000, and we know contribution per unit is 5 pound per unit. If you understand this thing here, 150,000 unit multiply by 20 pound per unit, you get sales revenue of 3 million. When you multiply 15 pound variable cost per unit by 150,000 unit, you will get total variable cost of 2.25 million. When you deduct variable cost from sales revenue, you get total contribution of 750,000, and difference between total contribution between 150,000 level of activity and 100,000 activity is 250,000. You can see total contribution increased due to the increase in level of activity. Another concept that we need to understand is fixed cost. Total fixed cost remain the same. It does not change with the level of activity. Fixed cost, as the name suggests, it is fixed regardless of the level of activity. When we have, as you can see, at 100,000 level of activity, at 150,000 level of activity, and all the other level of activity, fixed cost is the same. It doesn't change with the change in the level of activity. You can see, as we have earlier multiplied 150,000 unit by 20 pound per unit, we get sales revenue of 2 million. When we multiply 100,000 units by 15 pound per unit variable cost, we got 1.5 million of variable cost. Contribution is difference between sales revenue minus total variable cost is 500 pound. When you deduct fixed cost of 400,000, you get a profit of 100,000 at 100,000 level of activity. Likewise, you can see our profit increases when our total profit increases when the level of activity is increased. Another thing that we have to understand, although total fixed costs remain the same regardless of the level of activity, but fixed cost per unit decreases as the output and sale increases. Why is that? Let's find out. You know, our total fixed cost is 400,000 units. When you look at 100,000 level of activity, fixed cost is spread over 100,000 units. When you divide 400,000 by 100,000, you can see we get fixed cost per unit of 4 pound per unit. Now at 150,000 unit level of activity, 400,000 of fixed cost is spread over 150,000 unit, and our fixed cost is reduced to 2.67 because of spreading over larger number of units. In the same way, at 200,000 level of activity, fixed cost of 400,000 will be spread over 200,000 units. When you divide 400,000 fixed cost by 200,000 units, you can see our fixed cost is further reduced to 2 pound per unit. When we have an activity level of 250,000, 400,000 of fixed cost is spread over 250,000 units, and our fixed cost is further reduced to 160,000 units, 1.6 point per unit. Our full cost at this level of activity, as you can see, our variable cost was 15 pound per unit. Our fixed cost at 100,000 unit is 4 pound per unit. Our total cost is 19 pound per unit. You can see our sales price is 20 pound per unit. When you deduct full cost from sales price, you get profit of 1 pound. At 150 level of activity, our variable cost was 15 pound per unit. Our fixed cost per unit is 2.6 pence. Our total cost is now 17.67. Our selling price was 20 pound per unit. Our profit per unit under absorption costing is 2.33. You can see as the level of activity is increasing, our profit per unit is increasing as well. Why? Because our total cost is reducing with the increase in the level of output, because fixed cost is spread over larger number of unit, and our fixed cost per unit is decreasing with the increase in the level of output. Now we will look at an example. We are given an expected sales level of 100,000 units. Our fixed cost is 4 pound per unit. Main thing that you need to understand, fixed cost remain fixed. It does not change with the level of activity. In the question, original expected level was 100,000. We divided 400,000 fixed cost by 100,000 units. We get a fixed cost per unit of 4 pound per unit. Our selling price is 30 pound. Number of units are 100,000. When you multiply 30 pound per unit by 100,000 unit, you get 3 million of sales revenue. Variable cost is 20 pound per unit. Fixed cost is 4 pound per unit. Total cost is 24 pound per unit. Variable cost plus fixed cost, 20 pound plus 4 pound is 24 pound. We multiply total cost by total number of units, 100,000 units. When we multiply 24 by 100,000, we get 2.4 million total fixed cost. Our profit is 300 million sales revenue minus 2.4 million total cost. Total profit is 600,000. Another way of looking at this thing, this question is contribution instead of total cost. Our selling price is 30 pound per unit. Variable cost is 20 pound per unit. When we deduct variable cost of 20 pound from sale price of 30 pound, contribution per unit we get is 10 pound. Total number of units are 100,000. We multiply 100,000 unit by 10 pound per unit contribution. We get total contribution of 1 million. Fixed cost is 400,000. We deduct 400,000 from 1 million. We get profit of 600,000. Under absorption costing and contribution, we get same profit, which is 600,000, but full cost under absorption costing can mislead you in making decision. That is why we look at the contribution instead of full cost. I will show you why this is the reason. Let's assume we have received an additional order of 5,000 units at a price of 23 pound per unit. If you look at this order here, order we received for 5,000 additional unit, price per unit is 23 pound per unit. You can see that total cost is 24 pound per unit. If you can see total cost is more than the price we are going to charge for the additional units. You can reject this order because you can say our total cost is 24 pound, but we are selling it for 23 pound. We are making a loss. So you can reject this order. That is why full cost is not looked at when making decision in the short term. We look at contribution margin. Contribution per unit, as you can see, our additional units are 5,000 units. Price per unit is 23 pound. Our variable cost, you can see, is 20 pound per unit. Additional order of 5,000, each unit is contributing 3 pound. When you multiply 3 pound by 5,000 additional unit, you can see because of this additional unit we are making 15,000 toward our profit, which is why this order is appropriate and we can accept this order. If additional fixed cost is incurred because of this additional order, then that additional fixed cost need to be taken into consideration as well to make a decision. As one important thing where the question can, in exam question can trick you, it will say to you the fixed cost per unit is 4 pound per 4 pound. You know, when you look at the question, it has given you a expected level of activity which was 100,000, and it says to you fixed cost is 4 pound per unit. When you multiply 4 pound per unit to number of unit, you get 400,000 fixed cost. Later in the question, if question says that the number of units sold are 80,000, then your fixed cost will not be 4 pound, it will be 5 pound per unit. Why? You know our fixed cost is fixed regardless of the level of activity. Our fixed cost is 400,000 unit, and when you have a sales of 80,000, 400,000 cost will be spread over 80,000 unit, not on 100,000 unit. When you divide 400,000 unit by 80,000 unit, you get fixed cost of 5 pound per unit. That is why we look at the contribution per unit and total contribution. Let's see this example here. Assume your selling price is 30 pound, your variable cost is 20 pound, contribution per unit is selling price minus variable cost. We get 10 pound per unit contribution. When you multiply level of activity, which is 80,000, by 10 pound per unit contribution, we get total contribution of 800,000. You deduct fixed cost from total contribution of 800, we get the total profit of 4,000. You must remember, fixed costs are always constant. It remains the same regardless of the level of activity. When the number of units are decreased, you must divide total fixed cost by the new number of units. In our example here, we had 100,000 of unit earlier in the question, and cost per unit, fixed cost per unit was 4 pound per unit. We multiply 4 pound by 100,000 unit, we get 400,000 total fixed cost. Later in the question, when 80,000 units were mentioned, you will spread 400,000 fixed cost over 80,000 unit, and fixed cost per unit will increase to 5 pound per unit. We will look at one more concept in our decision making, which is cost volume profit analysis. It is a relationship between activity level, cost and profit, and it is based on contribution analysis. One application of cost volume profit analysis is break-even point. Break-even point is fixed cost divided by contribution per unit. Let's find out how we arrive at this equation. You know, at break-even point, there is no profit, no loss. In other words, sales revenue is equal to total cost. We know total cost is, as you can see here, total cost is equal to fixed cost plus variable. Fixed cost plus variable cost is our total cost. In this equation, we can replace total cost by variable cost plus fixed cost. Another way of writing this equation is, we can write it like this: sales revenue minus variable cost is equal to fixed cost. You know, total contribution, as you can see here, is sales revenue minus variable cost. We can write here, instead of this, we can say total contribution is sales revenue minus variable cost. And you also know total contribution is contribution per unit multiplied by number of units. We can change this equation to contribution per unit multiplied by break-even unit is equal to fixed cost, because sales revenue minus variable cost is total contribution. As you can see here, we get total contribution when we deduct variable cost from sales revenue. And we also know total contribution is equal to contribution per unit multiplied by the number of units. At break-even level of activity, we will use break-even number of units. Contribution per unit multiplied by break-even points unit is equal to fixed cost. If you take contribution here, we will get break-even point is equal to fixed cost divided by contribution per unit. Let's do one example here. Selling price is 10 pound per unit. Variable cost is 6 pound per unit. Fixed cost is 200 pound. If you look at contribution, we will find the contribution first. Selling price is 10 pound per unit. Variable cost is 6 pound per unit. contribution per unit is 4 pound. Why? 10 pound minus 6 pound is 4 pound. Break-even point is equal to 20 fixed cost divided by contribution per unit. We will divide 200 pound by 4 pound per unit. We will get 50,000 unit break-even point. At 50,000 level of activity, there will be no profit, no loss. Let's prove it if we have done it right or wrong. We will write here sales quantity is 50,000, unit price is 10 pound per unit. We multiply 10 pound unit price by 500 units. We get 500,000. Variable cost is 6 pound per unit. When we multiply 50,000 unit by 6 pound per unit, we get 300,000 variable cost. Contribution is sales revenue minus variable cost, which is 200 pound. Fixed cost is 200 pound. As we can see here, we deduct fixed cost from contribution margin. We get 0 when we deduct fixed cost from contribution margin. You can see at 50,000 level of activity, we did not make any profit, neither we make any loss. This is how we calculate break-even point. I hope everyone, you would have found this video easier for you to understand the concept of marginal costing and contribution per unit. You can find more examples on this topic in my next video. You can visit my website www.noorrafiali.com. Have a very good day. Bye.